Hey everyone, and welcome to our warehouse management video training, session number 2, Resolv WMS configuration. Resolv Warehouse Management has several configurations that will allow you to customize your warehouse processes. Those include options for general configuration, picking, receiving, inventory transactions, production, counting transactions, and RMAs. The settings we will see in this video can be enabled or disabled to fit your company's specific warehouse needs. To begin, we start by opening up the Resolv WMS configuration screen in SAP. We're going to go over here first to Administration, Resolv Setup, Resolv Warehouse Management, and then WMS configuration. So this is going to open up the WMS configuration screen, and as you can see at the top here, we've got several different tabs that coordinate with sections of our mobile, such as picking and inventory and counting, and we'll go through each tab. So starting with general, these are just some general options that will work across multiple different types of screens. They're not really dedicated to just one function. So for instance, here we have this option to require item scans. In our WMS, they have a list of the items that they're going to be picking or receiving or whatever the screen's functions are. If you prefer to not allow them to select the item directly from the screen and force them to actually scan the barcode or scan the item, that's what these checkboxes will do. We have the ability to use license plates in our system. If you're unfamiliar with license plates they kind of work as like a one item code or a batch if you want to for multiple items so that you can move this, let's say, pallet of goods all around your warehouse and only be scanning one license plate number instead of all the items on it. So for instance, if I had a pallet with 20 of item A and 30 of item B and 10 of item C, I could assign that a license plate, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then when I'm doing transfers or I'm doing counts or I'm doing picking, I would be able to, instead of scanning each individual item on that pallet, I would scan the license plate, and that will cover all of the items on the license plate. So I just scan the license plate once, and that takes care of all the items and quantities on it. So I don't have to individually scan each item on there. And that includes cereals and batches as well. So that's two of the main functions here on the general tab. Moving to our picking tab. Now, some of these options you're going to actually see again throughout the rest of the tabs. We have some similar things like defaulting the quantity or the printing of the labels. Those sorts of things can be done in receiving and in inventory. There's other different screens that have similar functions, but the configuration screen allows you to choose different settings for each type of function if you want. So for instance, for sales orders, reserve invoices, and all pick lists, do we want the user to have to enter in the quantity, or do we want the actual document quantity to default in, and then the user can just confirm or override it if they need to change it? But you may choose to have this here for picking, but on the receiving tab, you may decide that you want your warehouse workers to enter the quantity in when they're receiving in a PO. So in here in picking, you can do default the order quantity, but in receiving, you may want the user to enter the quantity. So we have this similar option, but on different tabs so that you can, again, each function can have its own sort of setting. So that's the quantity there. The next option we have here is to be able to print items while you're picking. This item label printing is something that can be done throughout other functions and tabs, which we'll see obviously as we move through. If you don't want to print them, you don't have to. We actually have standalone screens in the mobile that allow you to print labels, whenever you want as one-offs or in big groups or whatever you want to do. But if you want to actually print them while you're picking, so that as you're picking an item, you stick a label on it so that when it gets to the customer, they have labels already on it for them. Right here is the kind of asking you how many quantities of labels you want to print. One per line would be, if you have a line item, even if there's a quantity of 10 on that line item, it would just print one label for that line. One per unit would be, in that same example, since there's a line quantity of 10, it would print 10 labels. And then prompt user will pop up a prompt asking you how many of that individual line item you want to print. So instead of 1 or 10, maybe you're just going to print 5 and put it on every other one or something like that. So that those are the three options as far as how many labels you want printed. Inside the screens, you'll see that you'll be able to either manually print them, or you can have the system auto print them as you're moving through the document. So right now, this setting you see is never, so we would have to manually print them. on document finishes, when I'm done with the entire document and hit finish, it would print all my labels, and on line save, it would basically print the label after each line is picked. So if I have 10 items, after I pick item 1, it'll print the labels for item 1. I pick item 2, print the labels for item 2, and so on and so forth. So those are the different options as to if you want the labels auto-printed and at what point in the picking do you want them. Override, we have override password options here. If you want to make users enter a password every time they short pick or cancel a pick, you would just enter this password in here and check off the box. And then when they go to short pick, so if it says pick 10 and they pick 9 and hit finish, it's going to say, please enter the override password to short pick this. And then you could have just your managers have the override password, and the pickers would have to go to the warehouse manager and say, hey, can you put the password in? That way they can find out. It says pick 10, it says we have 10, why are you only picking 9? Moving to the receiving tab, we've got the same options here as far as the auto quantities for POs and AP reserve invoices, as well as for containers. We've got options here like allow over receipt. So if you have a PO obviously for 100 and the vendor sends you 120, do you want to allow that to be done? We've got the auto generation of batches. So if your items are batch managed, if they're already batch managed from the vendor, they may have their own batches already on there. So you may just utilize those, which standard SAP does and we do as well. But if you don't get any batch numbers from the vendor and you'd like to batch them yourself so you can keep track of it, then you can allow the system to make batches for you. PO number dash date, PO number dash line number, or it'll just default the batch number to be the actual expiration date. We've got the print label option during receiving, like we just saw, and same thing here with containers. And then you got two options here for creating documents as drafts. So if you want the GRPO created as a draft instead of as a live document, you have those different options to do that here. Now the inventory tab has a lot of different options. I'm just going to real quick, you'll see we've got the same kind of things for ITR picking, inventory transfer requests if you want to print labels. We've got the return request, the SAP kind of RMA screen where you set up this return request document, and then you can receive that item in on the handheld, and then inside SAP it would create the actual goods return or AR credit memo. So that's what the return request here is. That's kind of what's new in 9.3. But again, we have the same things as far as the quantities and printing the labels for ITRs and those return requests there. On the left-hand side, you'll see a couple of different functions here for transfers. If you want us to remember the last bin for the to and the from that you used, we can do that. A lot of customers like to use that option because if I'm transferring a lot of items from one bin to another, instead of having to do scan from bin, scan to bin, scan item, scan from, scan to, scan item, it'll just remember the last to and the last from bin I scanned, and that way I could just do scan item, scan item, scan item, and then when I'm ready to move on to the next set of bins, I'll scan the bins to and from that first time, but then the next 10, 12, 15, however I'm scanning from those two bins, it'll just remember it for me, and again, I just have to keep scanning the item and not worry about the bins every single time. So we have the ability to use 2D barcodes, which we'll get into probably in a later video. But this is where you would set that default barcode. So you would basically design your 2D barcode, or maybe the vendor sends you a 2D barcode with the item code and like 40 different serial numbers on it. Instead of having to scan each serial number, you'd be able to use that 2D barcode and just scan the barcode once, and it can backfill all the serial numbers for you. So that's kind of how the 2D barcode functionality works. You would set up your mappings and then assign them to the items. And this is where you just assign the default. Each item can have its own 2D barcode. This is where you can set a default. If all your items are going to use the same one, this is where you would set that here. Direct put away and bin replenishments and cross dock. These are three functions we are going to also go over in pretty good detail. Just to go over some small options here, you'll see direct put away is a function we have that allows you to take the items from the receiving bin and have the system suggest where they should be put away. That way, you're not having your warehouse worker walking around wondering, is there room here? Where does this item go? The system can tell you, make suggestions as to where it should go. Bin replenishment, again, we'll go through that in more detail, but it allows you to have these overstock bins. If you have overstock bins and your main picking bins get low on quantities, fall below minimum, you can have the system suggest that you put the items from the overstock bins into the pick bins. That way you're kind of being proactive in replenishing and cross-docking. Another function we'll go through, It basically allows you to have an idea of what items that you've just received and are in the receiving bin that may not be a good idea to put away just yet because they're actually gonna go out on deliveries, today. So it saves your warehouse workers a time. Instead of putting the items all the way back in their picking location just to go pick them an hour later, it gives you a list of all the items that you can move to a cross-dock location so that the warehouse workers know to go pick from there instead of going to find it in the main part of the warehouse. All right, the production tab just got production picking and receiving, and you've got, again, the auto-fill quantities and the label printing. On the counting tab, we have a couple different options for our different counting screens. In WMS, we have multiple different types of counting screens: physical count, inventory count, cycle count, bin count. So these are some of the options that you can enable or disable for those sorts of screens. So, for instance, in the physical inventory counting, do you want to allow the counters to look up the batches? What I mean by that is when I get to a bin and I am supposed to count, let's say the bin has a bunch of items in it, do you want to allow me to see what batches are supposed to be in that bin, or do you want me to count blind? Same with allowing empty bin counts. If you walk up to a bin and it's empty, do you want to allow the user to just say, okay, this bin's empty, and it would, if there's any items in the bin as far as SAP is concerned in the system, even though there's nothing physically there, SAP and WMS would zero out everything that was supposed to be in that bin. So again, these are things we want to either allow or not allow. This hide in warehouse quantity option, and over here the counting options just is for all of the counting screens. And for instance, we have this default capture batch detail. So what that does is when you're doing a count, if you do have batch details like expiration dates or admission dates or batch attributes, we would default those values into the screen so that you can see them, and we would also allow you to change them and then resave them if they changed. Also, if you didn't have any batch attributes or expiration dates or anything like that captured in the first place, we can allow you to capture them now when you're doing a count. Maybe you missed them up front and now you're going to capture them all when you're doing your count. And lastly, in the RMA tab, some of the same functions we've seen throughout the rest of the tabs. You've got your quantity fills, you got your label printings for the return request and the goods return request, which is just on the AP side. It's an RMA kind of going back to the vendor. You would basically scan on the handheld and it would go out of the system and it would create AP goods return. And then you've got the two options to create both documents as drafts. But yes, that's the gist, and that's the kind of overall view of the different options we have in WMS configuration. All right, thanks everybody, and I'll see you for the next video.